Hi everybody, this is Ryan and this is lesson 8 of working with JavaScript. In this lesson we're going to be learning about if statements. So we start by linking to our external script file, and we have a div tag as well where we can display some output. Once again using my anonymous function, and I'm going to create a variable to begin with called happy, and I'm going to set it to true. So I want to see if I'm happy or not. So I say if happy is equal to true, open curly brackets, block.innerHTML, I am happy, and close my curly brackets. So the if statement always has the test in brackets, in round brackets, and if that test is true, it executes whatever's in between the curly brackets. So I could actually just remove this equal to true and just simply say if happy, because the way an if statement works is the true part of the statement is always the if part of the statement, and the false part of the statement is always the else part of the statement. So let's see what we get. I'm happy. If, however, I set this to false, I'll just get a blank screen, nothing coming up, because I never had an else component to the statement. So the else component to the statement is completely optional. I'm going to add it in now. Block.innerHTML equal to I am sad. Okay. So either the if portion of the statement will execute, or the else portion of the statement will execute. It all depends on whether this is going to be true or false. So if it's going to be true, the if part of the statement executes. If it's going to be false, the else part of the statement executes. You don't have to have an else. You could just have an if by itself. So if we compare this to the ternary operator, which we looked at in the previous lesson, you'll see that it takes a lot more lines of code to write. If we did this with a ternary operator, we could do it in one line of code. But the advantage of using an if-else statement is that you could choose to just have an if portion of the statement and not worry about the else part of the statement. The other nice thing about the if-else statement compared to the ternary operator is you can do more than one instruction. Okay, so I needed to put a plus equal to sign just to concatenate. So you can have as many lines of code as you want between the curly brackets. The fact that it's between curly brackets means that all of the lines between the curly brackets will execute if the condition is true. Otherwise, all the lines between the curly brackets of the else component will execute if the statement is false. So let's do the same example we did earlier with the adult and the child. We'll create a variable called age. I want to now test, is this person a child or an adult? So let's say if the age is larger than or equal to 21, then we'll display a value to the panel, to the block of of adult. Else, I don't have to have an else, remember, but often it makes sense to have an else. I'll say they are a child. So in this case, they're an adult. If I change the value to a 4, Now they're a child. So this is all well and good for a situation where we only have two possible outcomes. So here they're either an adult or a child. But what would happen, for example, if I had three cases: an adult, teenager, and a child? A simple if-else will no longer work. So we use something called an else-if statement. So we could say if they are greater than, or should we say if they are less than 13, they'll be a child. Then we could say else if and do another test with curly brackets. So we could say else if the age is greater than or equal to 13 and the age is less than 20, they must be a teenager. Otherwise, they must be an adult. So in this case, they're a child. A 14-year-old should be a teenager, and a 24-year-old should be an adult. And you can add as many else if statements as you want. Just keep adding them one after the other. Each else if statement must have its own independent test. The final else statement is completely optional, and it should not have a test. Because basically the final else statement means if none of the previous conditions have been met, then carry out the else statement. So our program works perfectly in terms of the syntax, but in terms of logic, we haven't quite worked out all the logic yet. Because what happens if the person is 200 years old, for example? It still says they're an adult. And what happens if the person is minus 2 years old? It says they're a child. So you can see that even though the program is working, from a programming point of view, it's not working logically. Logically, it doesn't make sense. So when you code, you always need to think, am I making any programming errors? And also, am I making any logical errors? In this case, we are making logical errors. We haven't accounted for all the possibilities. So the best way to program is to always think of testing for the valid possibilities and letting the else part of the statement handle anything that's invalid. The reason for this is because there's always going to be fewer valid possibilities than there are invalid possibilities. So there can be more things wrong with someone's age than there can be right with somebody's age. So let's do this. Let's let the else part of the statement say invalid age. And then we just use else if statements to cater for all the valid parts of the statement. So an adult will be someone who is 20, in this case, who's larger than 20 and smaller than, let's say, 120. Okay, so a minus 2-year-old should now come up as an invalid age, but it's still coming up as a child, so we still have a logical error. I need to also make sure that there's a minimum age set. So I'm saying now the age must both be larger than 0 as well as smaller than 13. Now it says invalid age. So minus 2 doesn't fall into this category, it doesn't fall into this category, it doesn't fall into this category, so therefore the else part of the statement catches anything that wasn't handled previously. In the same way, if I say an age of 200, does 200 fall into this category? No. This category? No. This category? No. So the else lands up handling that category. Invalid age. Interestingly, even if I set the age to something like a whole bunch of text, this program will still say invalid age, because the else part catches anything that wasn't handled previously. Best way of programming. Just cater for the valid possibilities and let the else catch anything else that wasn't previously caught before. And that ends our lesson in working with if statements,